What's up, guys? Welcome to Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow. So tonight we're going to be talking about a musician that I have heard plenty of his songs, but had no idea who this man was, or should I say, Predator was. And this the other day I'm listening to the lad and hear him bring up Mystikal. And Mystikal is one of those artists where the second you hear his voice, you know exactly who it is. The raspy scream, the aggressive delivery, that raw New Orleans energy. That's at least what he's known for. And there was nobody else in hip hop who sounded like him. But behind the platinum plaques, the chart topping singles, the mainstream success in a much deeper, more complicated story is the story of a man named Michael Lawrence Tyler, better known as Mystikal, a man who went from the streets of New Orleans to the U.S. Army to becoming one of the most recognizable voices on No Limit Records, to reaching the peak of commercial success and then watching it all change because of the choices that carried permanent consequences, to say the least. But before we get into the controversy, we have to understand the journey a little bit. So Michael Lawrence Tyler was born September 22nd, 1970 in New Orleans, Louisiana. And his father died when he was just 7 years old. He was raised primarily by his mother, Marie, in a disciplined household in the 12th Ward. New Orleans wasn't just where he grew up, it shaped the way he sounded, the city's bounce, its energy, its musical DNA people have said that it is all over his delivery. And after high school, Mystikal enlisted in the United States Army. He served as a combat engineer during the Gulf War, and the kind of job that involved clearing obstacles, building bridges under pressure, and doing what he later called suicide work. When he came home, he returned to New Orleans and started chasing music in earnest. He was different from the jump, though. While a lot of rappers were settling in to similar flows, Mystikal treated his voice like an instrument on its own. He could whisper, then explode into that signature rasp and rapid fire cadence that felt almost like James Brown filtered through the streets of the South. His early work on the independent Big Boy Records got a lot of attention. A self-titled project in 1994 led to a deal with Jive. Then the move came that changed everything, signing with Master P's No Limit Records in the mid-1990s. In the late 1990s, No Limit wasn't just a label, it was a movement. Master P built an independent empire that proved Southern artists could dominate without waiting for the traditional industry to open up the door for them. Mystikal became one of its most distinctive voices. Albums like Unpredictable in 1997 and Ghetto Fabulous in 1998 established him as a major force to be reckoned with. Unpredictable went platinum and hit number 3 on the Billboard 200. He was all over No Limit projects and part of the 504 Boys. The energy was undeniable. Then came the peak pretty much in 2000. Mystikal released Let's Get Ready. The album debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. The lead single, We All Know It, Shake Ya Ass, produced by the Neptunes with Pharrell on the hook, became a massive crossover hit, peaking at number 13 on the number Hot 100. Danger, Been So Long followed and also cracked the top 15, but suddenly Mystikal wasn't just a respected Southern artist, He was basically a mainstream star. He was on major stages on television, getting Grammy nominations. Tarantula in 2001 brought more nominations, including Best Rap Album and Best Male Rap Solo Performance. At the height of it all, he had one of the most unique and recognizable voices in the game. But success puts every decision under a microscope. We all know that. In the first major case that derailed everything started in July 2002. So Mystikal accused his longtime hairstylist of stealing roughly $80,000 in checks from him. According to prosecutors, he and two bodyguards then coerced her into sexual acts at his Baton Rouge apartment. And to make things worse for her and himself, he recorded on video, not knowing, well, I don't know what the fuck he was thinking there. You're rich, you're famous, and you're doing this disgusting act, trying to humiliate this woman and make this video for what? A trophy. And this can be a early example of some of the sick behavior that was going on behind the scenes. And the woman reported the incident. Police recovered the videotape from a safe in his home. He was initially charged with aggravated rape, which carried a mandatory life sentence in Louisiana, and extortion. In June 2003, he pleaded guilty to the lesser charges of sexual battery and extortion. The two bodyguards also pleaded to sexual battery at sentencing in January 2004. The judge reviewed the videotape and noted Mystikal's two prior arrests for gun and drug possession and rejected any expectation of probation. He sentenced Mystikal to 6 years in prison. He began serving immediately and was released in January 2010. But when he got out, he was a registered lifelong sex offender. While incarcerated, he also faced federal charges for failing to file tax returns for 98 and 99. Those resulted in a concurrent 1-year sentence. After his release, the legal problems did not stop. In February 2012, while still on probation from the 2003 case, Mystikal was arrested on misdemeanor domestic abuse and battery charge involving his long-term partner, with whom he had 2 children with. That arrest violated the terms of his probation, which required him to remain arrest-free. A judge ordered him to serve 90 days in jail. He ultimately served about 81 of the days after credit for the time he had already got. Then came the 2016 to 2020 case. In October of 2016, after a Southern hip-hop concert in Shreveport, a woman accused Mystikal and another man of rape and kidnapping at a casino. He was indicted in 2017 on first-degree rape and second-degree kidnapping charges. He turned himself in and spent roughly 18 months in jail. He was eventually released on a $3 million bond in early 2019. In December 2020, a second grand jury returned a no true bill after prosecutors presented additional evidence, including casino surveillance and toxicology findings. The charges were dropped. Each of these cases, added to a long-standing pattern. The 2003 conviction established him as a registered sex offender. The 2012 domestic violence arrest showed continued issues with physical abuse while still under court supervision. And the 2016 accusation, even though those charges were ultimately dismissed, in my eyes, where there's smoke, there's fire, and it put him in the same category of allegations involving more sexual violence and predatory behavior like this rarely appears in a one-time event. It tends to repeat. Power, money, fame, status, all that can create the belief that the rules apply differently to you. When serious accountability is delayed or reduced for the first time, the behavior often continues, and that is how patterns form and become long standing. One incident followed by another, spanning nearly 2 decades. The industry itself, the reaction was mixed and often quiet. During the peak, the No Limit years, and the commercial high of Let's Get Ready, the focus stayed on the music and, his unique voice. Once the 2003 case became public, many in the business treated it as a personal legal matter rather than an industry-wide conversation, as in my eyes it should have been. There were no major public campaigns to drop him at that time. The talent was still there, seen as bankable by some. After his release, he had features and performances. They continued in certain circles. Master P remained one of the most visible supporters, even after the 2022 arrest. At the 2023 Lovers and Friends festivals in Las Vegas, Master P played Mystikal's records and told the crowd to get their hands up for his dog, and repeatedly called to free Mystikal. That public loyalty drew a lot of criticism online and highlighted a divide. Some longtime associates stayed protective of the No Limit bond, while others in the broader industry did what they should have been and kept their distance. As the pattern of serious allegations became harder to ignore, overall the industry's response, though, was more silence and compartmentalization than open discussion. In the early years, by the time the 2022 case unfolded, the damage to his public standing was already deeper than it should have got. In July 2022 came the next serious arrest. A woman accused Mystikal of beating, sexually assaulting, and holding her against her will at his home in Prairieville, Louisiana, after a dispute over money. And that seems to be his MO. He was held without bond from that point forward. In March 2026, not too long ago, he pleaded guilty to third-degree rape as part of a plea agreement that reduced the original first-degree charge. Shortly before sentencing, he tried to withdraw the plea, but the judge denied the motion, and now on June 16, 2026, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum under the deal. And the victim spoke in court and asked for the full sentence. Mystikal is currently serving that 20-year term, and those charges and the final conviction permanently altered how many people view his legacy and effectively ended the public career that he once had. And at the end of the day, prison does not care what kind of songs you put out or who you used to be. The platinum albums, the #1 Billboard debuts, the Grammy nominations, the No Limit history, the unique voice. Throw all that shit out the matter. All that stuff that once defined an era, none of that carries any weight once you're inside and labeled a sexual predator. With those type of sexual violence charges, I don't care how much money you got, you are no good. The system and the people around you don't give a fuck about your stage name or your hits. When the conviction is predatory behavior, that label becomes the primary identity. Fame does not buy respect or protection in that environment. It just doesn't. The past does not soften the reality. You are judged by the nature of what you were convicted of. and that judgment is permanent. And that's the cold truth of a lot of these high profile cases that they have to eventually confront. And that brings us to the harder conversation. It's easy to reduce stories like this to the music, the money, or the headlines, but behind every public rise and fall is a person, a talent, decisions, struggles, and consequences. And I feel like they should have seen his behavior a long time. I don't think it should have took 20 years for him to get this 20-year sentence. He should have been stopped with this kind of behavior a long time ago. And his voice might have helped define a certain era of Southern hip hop. That voice was singular. The impact on the culture, it was real from what I've heard and what I've researched. You can still hear his influence in some ways. The energy, the intensity, a lot of artists, chase today. At the same time, the seriousness of what followed cannot be ignored whatsoever. A long standing pattern of predatory behavior and related violence does not get erased by talent. Success does not make anyone untouchable, and the choices made along the way still matter. The consequences are real for the people involved and for the person who made them. That's the reality of looking honestly at the lives of public figures. Incredible art and serious accountability can exist in the same story, but when the behavior becomes a repeated pattern across multiple cases spanning years and decades, the pattern becomes part of the story that outlives any type of music. Mystikal climbed higher than most could ever dream of. He also fell hard from his own depravity. The music remains legendary for those who lived in that era. The rest of the story is a reminder that no amount of talent or fame cancels out the weight of the decision a person makes, especially when those decisions form a clear reported pattern of harm. This has been Fed by Fire. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Catch you guys on the next one.